Okay, on Sunday, we're in lesson 88, um, and that's the final week. And it has to deal with the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. I kind of want to go through maybe a pretty good review, just to make sure that we're all uh, up to speed. Did everybody who wanted one get one of these maps that kind of show the area of Galilee and Judea? If you need one, raise your hand or come up afterwards and get some. It just kind of puts in perspective when we talk about Bethany, the Mount of Olives, Bethphage, if I'm saying that right, and Jerusalem, where they're all how they all kind of interact with each other close by. This final week, remember what we a lot of people call it the Passion Week. Okay, it's the last full week of Christ's life before his crucifixion. All four of the, yeah, please go ahead. All four of the synoptic gospels cover this time period in detail. And we talked about the reason why. We came to the conclusion that it helps us understand the significance. It's important of what was happening or occurring. And also, just from a teacher's standpoint of view, repetition is a good teacher. And if something is said over and over, it helps us to understand the importance of it. What I had found, and I didn't know this till I did the study, it's interesting that the first 11 chapters of John span most of Jesus' ministry. The next 9 chapters are devoted to 1 week. That tells you how significant that week is. And then the final chapter 21 is about the post-resurrection events and things of that nature. We'll study that later on as we go down. We talked about Bethany, and we remember that town because of our study about raising of Lazarus. And so that's where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were from. Jesus didn't stay when he went into Jerusalem, because people there were trying to hurt him, trying to kill him. So he made the way back to some place along near Bethany, maybe in Bethany, side of Mount of Olives, and would stay there the night and then come back into town the next day. If he went back to Bethany, there's a number of reasons. Maybe he just enjoyed being with friends and family. So anyway, Bethany was a short distance from Jerusalem. Jesus probably arrived in Bethany on Friday, we talked about, and spent the Sabbath with his friends. And then in John's account, and again, I mentioned that because of ease of the all four of the gospel accounts right here close by, I'm using that, but I do have my Bible handy, that it was on the next day. The John 12:12 says that. On the next day, the large crowd who had come to the feast. So he went into Jerusalem on that next day. It was during this week, remember that we talked about that Jesus did his final work among the Judeans, getting ready for himself to for the passion of the cross, as I have written down here. This was the only time, first and only time, that Jesus planned and promoted a public demonstration surrounding himself. And I asked the question, why? And I think we came to the conclusion, well, one, his time was come. It also fulfilled prophecy, and it forced the Jewish leaders to act on their plans against them. Okay? The triumphal entry is, again, all recorded in all four Gospels. John's varies a little bit. Do you remember what some of the details in John were that the other 3 Gospels didn't have? Remember what we talked about? John was the only one that mentions palm branches. Yeah. The prophetic fulfillment in the event is not mentioned in the other Gospels. That's in verse 12, 16 of John. His popularity resulting from the raising of Lazarus. That's mentioned in verse 17 and 18 of chapter 12. And the response of the Pharisees in 19, where it says again, so the Pharisees said to one another, you see that you are not doing any good. Look, the world has gone after him. What a great thing that would be, right? And we talked about how the disciples were not aware of this royal significance of the triumphal entry, but it was only after Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and ascension, to be honest with you, that they fully understand what was going on. The religious world calls the Sunday that we've been talking about what? Remember what that was? Palm Sunday, okay? And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in secular religions involving that. We don't celebrate it other than acknowledge it. That's what it's called. Many scholars believe that there was, you remember the number I gave, how many people were in Jerusalem for the Passover? Anywhere from 100,000 to 150,000. And that was with 85 to 125 of them coming from outside the area. So, coupled with the population of Jerusalem, it could be anywhere in between, or it could even be a little higher, depending on who you read. Of course, the reason why is many of the in the crowd would have been Galileans who had earlier heard Jesus and witnessed his deeds. Some had seen Lazarus actually raised. That was all important. Earlier Jesus rejected the idea of making him a king. That's found in John 6 and 15. Now it appeared to these people that Jesus was doing what they had desired for so long. And the reason is his time had come. We talked about the significance of palm branches. Do you remember what some of those were? Royalty, okay. Yeah. The law made no provisions for palm branches at the, made provisions for palm branches at the Feast of the Tabernacles. We find that in Leviticus 23 and 40, but no provisions for Passover. However, palm branches were used to celebrate other festive occasions. Okay? Palms were a symbol of triumph and Jewish nationalism. Of course, on this occasion, the crowd probably thought there were some political overtones as Jesus was being welcomed in. We switched gears at this time and we talked about the mode of transportation that Jesus used to get into the city. We talked about how Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that Matthew says, sent two disciples out to get a donkey and a colt. Mark and Luke just say a colt. And John just basically says, Jesus finding a young donkey sat on it is written. How many of you know that on a donkey's back is what symbol? How many know what the symbol is? It's a cross. Okay? I made some copies. I only have about 10. But take some and pass it all around. I find this very interesting. I don't have very many only made 10 copies. The markings. There's some, I think there's 3 to pass around. Now, there's a lot of speculation on how this came about. This particular breed of donkey is called Nubian, Nubian. It's been around forever, and it is told this was the breed of donkey that Jesus rode in on. It's interesting that a lot of people think this was a divine happening. For example, they think that, and I don't know, it could be, I guess, that the donkey was there at the crucifixion and was actually standing behind the cross. And as the sun went down, the shadow of the cross was right over its back, and God caused it to be there. I don't know. The The explanation that I think is more fitting is genetics. uh, it's a trait passed down, okay, of generations to generation. And what this marking does, supposedly, it helps to break up the animal's body a little bit when it's trying to hide from predators. Kind of helps distort what it is, camouflage, if you will. So I found that kind of interesting. All donkeys have the marking, with the exception of some rare breeds that were developed in the Middle East, I think, years later. Okay, but all donkeys do have it. Now, can you see the marking on every donkey? Not necessarily. It depends on the coat color. The ones I passed around there, you can see pretty easily. The question also comes around, a mule we talked about is a hybrid from a horse and a donkey. Does the mule have it? Maybe, sometimes, but not always. But supposedly what I read and studied on is all donkeys have this marking. So that's a UBI, useful bit of information. Again, we talked about, all three gospel accounts say Christ sent 2 disciples into the village with instructions to find a donkey and its colt in Matthew, and just the colt in Mark and Luke. Again, don't think of this as being contradictory, but just supplemental additional information to help us understand better. We're not told, remember, whether arrangements had been made or not, but that the disciples knew what to tell somebody if they asked them, "Why are you doing this?" And the response was, do you remember what that was? The Lord has need. And that is what they did. Remember that some of the disciples had brought coats and stuff and laid them on the donkey's back. There's a kind of a makeshift saddle. Christ chose the colt for his steed. And why not the mother, as we talked about? Well, mother maybe was just brought along for calming effect. Wayne brought out a great point about maybe the colt was still nursing. I hadn't even thought about that, but that's very likely possible. So we don't know. But that's what the other possibility is. Perhaps that Jesus chose a colt because it had not been ridden. Okay. Many writers think that working animals are disqualified for sacred service. So that could have been a reason. We don't know. Why didn't he choose the horse? You remember that? Yeah, a horse represented war, and donkeys represented peace. I don't know how many had the chance to go to Job 39 and verse 19. This gave a very, I thought, poetic description of the horse. It says, "Have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. He mocks at fear and is not frightened, nor does he turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage, nor does he stand firm because the trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet, he says, aha, he smells the battle from the far, the thunder of captains and shouting." I think I mentioned that when I was in junior college, I took a course called The Bible as Literature. It was a very interesting course. It was taught by the minister from the Palm Springs Christ. And we went through things like this and talked just about the poetic writings and how it was. It was very, very interesting. But When you read that, do you get the impression that the horse is a grand creature? I do. Um, and so, anyway, that's why the horse was not chosen, because of it representing war, and the donkey was chosen. The Jews had, again, different views on each animal. Continue with the review here. Let's see. Again, the Prince of Peace riding on a donkey was a fulfillment of prophecy. We see that in Matthew 21, 4 and 5, John 12, 14 and 15. And the primary prophecy fulfilled by this event was in Zechariah 9:9. But wording also included Isaiah 62 and 11. As Jesus mounted the colt, the multitude carpeted the road with their outer garments and with leafy palm branches. Do you remember what I said the significance of them laying down their outer coats on the road was? It kind of was symbolic of them saying, "I give myself over to you. Have this. Have me." Um, People shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." And that word Hosanna, we said, was translated meaning "save, I pray." Save, I pray. Their words in the different Gospels were packed with messianic terminology. The Son of David, the Kingdom of David, the King who comes in the name of the Lord. As Jesus entered the Jerusalem with all the crowds all around him shouting, people inside the city were stirred. New King James Version says moved. Remember, we got that word stirred from the Greek word seio, S-E-I-O, which meant what? Remember that? Where we get the word seismic, meaning have to do with earthquakes. Move there. And that's where we stopped. That's where we stopped. I realize it's a long review, but are there any questions, comments, any thoughts? All right. New stuff. Again, we have previously stated that Jesus had discouraged the idea of crowning him king. Go back to John 6 and 15. Why did he allow this enthusiastic demonstration? We talked about it. Again, the time had come, fulfill prophecy. And here's one that makes a lot of sense to me. Perhaps another reason was that this was part of his final effort to compel Jerusalem, specifically its officials, to acknowledge him as the Messiah. That makes sense to me. And by doing this, nobody can never say that Jesus didn't try. I mean, when you think about it, what a great application that is to us today, to not give up on somebody. But sadly for the Jewish leaders, it was another opportunity missed. They were unwilling even to consider the possibility that Jesus was the Christ. Thoughts or comments? Okay. As the procession made its way into Jerusalem, some of the Pharisees came near and said to Jesus, this is found in Luke 19:39, said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Why would they say that? Why do you think they would say that? Any thoughts? 1939 here, Luke. Yeah. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." But Jesus answered, and we'll go over that in just a minute. Well, I think maybe the reason why they said that is the Jewish leaders, let's face it, were jealous of the followers that Jesus had. I mean, they were welcoming him like never before. That's one reason, maybe. Another one might be because they wanted to silence the crowd in order not to annoy the Roman forces. Maybe. I don't know. We know that the number of Roman soldiers increased in size during feast days for the fear of an uprising. And so maybe they didn't want to get those soldiers annoyed or mad or angered. But the one that really seems to fit, I think, is more likely it irritated the Jewish leaders to hear Jesus proclaimed as the Messiah. Any thoughts? They just couldn't stand him. Notice what Jesus' response to them was. Let me read verse 40 of Luke 19. But Jesus answered, I'll tell you, if these become silent, the stones will cry out. Kind of a weird statement when you look at it. Any idea what you think it might mean? Any thoughts? Well, what Roper talked about, he was revealing if the truth was known about me, the whole earth, both animate, in other words, living things, and inanimate, non-living things, would worship me. And I think that's very true. Very true. I tell you, if these become silent, the stones, inanimate, right? Non-living, they would cry out. If you only knew who I was. Pretty powerful statement. And pretty true. Comments, thoughts? Okay. You guys got to help me out. I got 15 minutes. I have a backup plan though. Were the Jewish leaders worried? Yeah. Yeah, they were. They had tried every way they could to discredit Jesus. But Jesus always manages to turn right back on them. Look at the response in John 12:19 again. So the Pharisees said to one another, you see that you are not doing any good. Look, the world has gone after him. All this crowd gathering around Jesus, cheering him on. I can just imagine the Jewish leaders going, what are we going to do? And there was only one answer. But of course, in hindsight, they really had no cause to worry, did they? Crowds are fickle. They are. This mob could, and sadly would, soon turn their backs on the Lord. Luke's narrative concludes this event by saying the procession had rounded the southern slope of the Mount of Olives, ready to descend into the Kidron Valley, that's in John 18:01. And Jesus looked at the panorama below, and he was overwhelmed by sorrow. Let's read Luke 19, 41 through 44. When he had approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you and surround you and hem you in on every side. And they will level you to the ground and your children within you. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. Powerful there. What's he talking about? What's going to happen in about 4 decades? The destruction of Jerusalem is less than 4 decades away. And that's, by the Roman armies. The city is interesting here. The city was under siege by Titus for 143 days. 600,000 Jews were slain. And thousands more were captured. So sad when you think about that. See, God had given Jerusalem a special time of visitation, right? Think about it. He Actually, God himself had come to the city in the person of who? His son. We see that in John 14 and 19. But again, they refused to recognize him. Thoughts or comments? Yes. Yeah. 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 The manual labor there. Yeah. You know, it's sad. Mark's narrative is kind of non-climactic at the end. One would think excitement must have gripped the crowd as they poured into the temple, when Jesus got there. Surely, surely this would be the time when Christ would set up his kingdom on earth. Instead, it says in Mark 11:11, Jesus entered Jerusalem and came into the temple, and after having looked around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late. Can you imagine how puzzled and disappointed the people must have been? This was it. This is when it was going to happen. Jesus kind of looked around. Okay, time to go. Yeah. I'm sure they said something like, tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow will be the day. Of course, it was not. Any thoughts? Kind of wraps it up. We'll go over the questions a little bit. And then with the remaining time, um, this is lesson 88. On Sunday, I'm supposed to do lesson 90 and 91, 91 probably on Wednesday. 89 covers Monday. And because we didn't, Jake was able to preach for us on Sunday, Matthew didn't do that. So I'm going to give you a little bit of lesson 89 so that it makes sense of lesson 90 tonight. And I'll probably review it. I think I was hoping Matt would be here so I could find out if he's going to do that. Do you know, Wayne? Okay. Okay. What he did? Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah. Okay. I just have even a basic page. Okay. The discussion questions for this final week on Sunday. What is Jesus' dramatic entrance in Jerusalem generally called? Triumphal entry or the Passion Week? Okay. How many of the gospel accounts tell of this entry? All four. Why did Jesus send two of his disciples into Bethphage? Find a donkey and a colt. On what was Jesus riding when he came into the city of Jerusalem? The colt. We talked quite a bit tonight about what did the horse symbolize? War. And the donkey symbolizes what? Peace. Okay. How did this event fulfill the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9? Well, let's turn to 9:9. 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey." So this is how that prophecy was fulfilled. What does the word Hosanna mean? Save, I pray. Mm-hmm. What are some of the reasons Jesus wept over Jerusalem? I think that's probably he obviously knew that less than 4 decades later it was, but I just think too he was saddened because he had tried so hard to make them believe, and they just rejected him. And that, when you think about it, it's sad. What does Zechariah 9:10 say Jesus would speak to the nations? He would speak peace to the nation. Peace. Any final thoughts on that? All right, real quick. Lesson 89 deals with the next day, Monday. Um, on that Monday, remember Jesus left on Sunday to go back to Bethany, and then he came back on Monday morning. They left for Jerusalem, but Jesus got hungry and said, or saw rather, a fig tree with leaves on it, but no fruit, and said, "No longer shall there ever be any fruit from you." And at once this fig tree started to wither. Now, it's interesting that um, fig season wasn't, it wasn't right at the right time. But the reason why Jesus thought there might be figs on there is because it had leaves. And a lot of times the fruit blooms happen first before the leaves come. So Jesus maybe thought that there were some um, green figs on the tree. I don't know if I want to eat green figs, but um, interesting thought here. How come Jesus didn't know there was no figs on the tree? He could have made figs on a tree, but this, when he left heaven, he emptied himself, and this really shows that he was full man. And so that was one of the points brought out. We know that Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling, and overturned the tables of the money changers. And that famous phrase, he would say, "My house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a robber's den." And so we know that also on that Monday, he healed the blind and the lame, which certainly upset the chief priests and the scribes. On that Monday, he was teaching in the temple. But again, in the evening, he would go back and spend the night on the Mount of Olives near Bethany. So now that kind of gets us to what was going on. He had done some miracles. We're going to talk about in depth a little bit more about the fig tree on Sunday, of why Jesus said what he did. Any final thoughts, and I'll shut up. Great. Okay. Thank you so much. We're done.